Right now, across the UK, something strange is happening in the rental market. The Northeast is seeing rents surge by over 9% in just 12 months, yet at the same time, experts are claiming the market is finally stabilising. Rental supply is at its highest point in years. More properties are hitting the market than we've seen since the pandemic, and somehow tenants are worse off than ever before. This doesn't make sense, does it? How can there be more available properties but less affordability? How can the market be stabilising while working families are being priced out of their homes? The truth is, what's happening right now is far more complex and frankly more concerning than the headlines suggest. The rental market isn't just changing, it's being completely reshaped. And what's coming in the next 12 months could push hundreds of thousands of people into housing insecurity. We're talking about a transformation that affects every single person in this country, whether you're a tenant desperately trying to keep a roof over your head, a landlord trying to make sense of incoming legislation, or someone just watching house prices from the sidelines, wondering if you'll ever be able to afford your own place. Before we dive into the shocking details, if you want to stay ahead of what's really happening in the UK property market, smash that like button right now. Seriously, it helps more people see this crucial information. And, with everything changing so rapidly, people need to know what's coming. And make sure you're subscribed to Property Reporter because we cut through the noise and bring you the real data, the actual numbers, and the honest analysis you need to make informed decisions about your housing future. We've just been covering some massive developments in UK property and housing, and trust me, you don't want to miss what's coming next. Let's start with the numbers that everyone's talking about, but nobody's really explaining. The average rent across the UK has now hit £1,354 per month. That's £70 more than this time last year, which works out to a 5.5% increase. Now, you might think that sounds fairly modest compared to the chaos we saw a couple years ago, and you'd be partially right. The rate of increase has slowed down compared to 2021 and 2022 when rents were absolutely skyrocketing. But here's what those percentage points actually mean for real people. That's an extra £840 a year that tenants need to find. And for families already stretched thin by the cost of living crisis, that's not pocket change. That's a family holiday, that's emergency savings, that's the buffer that keeps you from falling into real financial trouble. But the national average only tells part of the story, because the regional differences are absolutely wild right now. The Northeast is experiencing the most dramatic rental inflation in the entire country, with rents climbing 9.1% year on year. This is the region that's traditionally been the most affordable place to rent in the UK, and it's now seeing the fastest price growth. Meanwhile, Yorkshire and the Humber is at the opposite end, with the slowest growth at just 3.8% annually. London, which everyone assumes is always the worst, is sitting at an eye-watering average of £1,960 a month. But its growth rate has actually been slowing for 9 consecutive months now, coming in at 5.3%. This tells us something crucial. The rental crisis isn't uniform across the country. It's hitting different regions in completely different ways, and understanding where the pressure points are matters if you're trying to figure out what comes next. Then, you've got these specific towns and cities that are seeing absolutely bonkers increases that make the regional averages look tame. Chippenham in Wiltshire has seen rents jump 16.4% in a single year. Stockport is up 16.1%. Coventry has climbed 14.1%. Even places like Grimsby, which you'd never think of as a rental hotspot, is up 12%. These aren't just statistics. These are places where actual families are getting renewal notices and having to choose between paying the increase or moving their kids to a different school, changing their entire lives because the financial pressure is just too much. Some landlords in these areas are clearly pushing rents as high as the market will bear, testing what tenants can actually afford before they break. Now, here's where things get really interesting, And this is the part that doesn't make sense until you dig deeper. Rental supply across the UK has increased by nearly 20% compared to last year. 20%. That's massive. We're seeing more properties available to rent than we've had in years. At the same time, letting agents are reporting that they're getting 24% fewer inquiries from prospective tenants compared to 12 months ago. Demand is dropping. Supply is rising. In any normal market, that should mean rents are falling or, at the very least, staying flat. But they're not. They're still going up. So what's actually going on here? The answer lies in understanding where this new supply is coming from and where the reduced demand is going. Buy-to-let mortgage approvals for property purchases jumped 60% in the first quarter of 2025. Landlords and property investors are coming back to the market after years of sitting on the sidelines. They saw rental yields hit 6% on average across the UK, with some areas like the North East and Scotland pushing above 7.5%, and suddenly being a landlord looked attractive again. Mortgage rates have stabilised after the chaos of recent years, and investors are feeling confident enough to jump back in. That's your supply increase right there. But the demand decrease is equally important. More people are managing to become first-time buyers because mortgage availability has improved slightly. They're leaving the rental market altogether, which reduces competition for rental properties. Migration levels have also fallen from their recent peaks, which means fewer new people entering the UK and needing somewhere to live immediately. But here's the crucial point that explains why rents are still rising despite these changes. Nearly 3/4 of landlords are reporting 0% vacancy rates. 0. Their properties are fully occupied. Yes, there are more properties available on the market at any given moment, but they're still getting snapped up quickly. The fundamental problem hasn't changed. There still aren't enough homes, period. And while supply has increased by 20%, that's 20% of a number that was already far too low. We're not building enough. We haven't been building enough for decades. And all these market adjustments are just shuffling around the edges of a much bigger structural crisis. Let's talk about what this actually means for the people living through it, because the affordability situation is genuinely frightening. Since 2020, rents have increased by 36%. House prices, which everyone focuses on, have only gone up about 20% in the same period. Wages have increased by roughly 31%. Do the math on that. Rents are rising faster than both house prices and wages. The gap between what people earn and what they pay to keep a roof over their heads is getting wider, not narrower. Renters are now spending 44% of their take-home pay on rent, up from 40% in 2020. Nearly half of what you earn goes straight to your landlord before you've bought food, paid for transport, covered energy bills, or saved a single penny for the future. The dream of home ownership has become almost laughable for most renters. Only 10% of renters aged 20 to 44 can afford to buy a home in the current market. 10%. And if you're a single renter in that age bracket, your chances drop to under 3%. 3 out of every 100 single renters in their 20s and 30s can afford to buy. For everyone else, renting isn't a choice or a lifestyle preference, it's a trap. You're stuck paying someone else's mortgage with no prospect of ever having your own, watching house prices climb further and further out of reach while your rent keeps going up. Over half of people who do manage to buy now need financial help from family. The so-called bank of mum and dad is propping up the entire first-time buyer market. If you don't have parents with money, you're at a massive disadvantage. The social housing situation is even bleaker. Over 1.3 million households in England are currently on waiting lists for social housing. That includes 336,000 households in London alone, and that number has increased by 10% in just the past 2 years. There are 123,000 households currently in temporary accommodation, including 160,000 children. Kids growing up in unstable, often unsuitable temporary housing because their families have nowhere else to go. This temporary accommodation costs the government approximately £2 billion every year, money that's being spent on emergency measures rather than solving the underlying problem. And only 9,535 new social homes were built in 2022 to 2023. That's down from over 22,000 in 2003 to 2004. We're going backwards. Every year, more social homes are lost through right-to-buy sales or demolition due to poor conditions than are being added to the system. Now, if you thought all of that sounded bad, everything is about to get significantly worse, and the catalyst is a piece of legislation that just became law. The Renters' Rights Bill received royal assent on October 27, 2025, meaning it's now officially the Renters' Rights Act. Implementation is expected sometime between spring and autumn of 2026, though the government hasn't confirmed the exact date yet. They've promised to give landlords and letting agents sufficient time to prepare for what they're calling the biggest overhaul of the private rental sector in over 30 years. So what does this act actually do? The headline change is the abolition of Section 21 evictions, known as no-fault evictions. Under the current system, a landlord can serve a Section 21 notice and force a tenant to leave without giving any reason whatsoever. It's one of the leading causes of homelessness in the UK because tenants have almost no protection. You could be a model tenant, paying rent on time, keeping the property in perfect condition, and your landlord can still kick you out with just 2 months' notice simply because they feel like it. The new Act removes that power entirely. Landlords will now have to use Section 8 notices, which require them to specify valid legal grounds for eviction. Things like significant rent arrears, antisocial behaviour, or if they genuinely need to sell the property or move in themselves. For tenants, this is huge. It means you can actually challenge poor living conditions or unfair treatment without the constant fear that your landlord will retaliate by evicting you. The Act also abolishes fixed-term tenancies entirely. Every tenancy will become periodic, which means rolling month to month with no end date. Tenants will have a protected period of 12 months where landlords can't evict them to sell or move in, though tenants can still leave during that time by giving 2 months' notice. After 12 months, if a landlord wants their property back to sell or occupy, they'll need to give 4 months' notice. Rent increases will be limited to once per year and can only be done through a Section 13 notice. And if a tenant thinks the increase is excessive and above market rates, they can challenge it at a tribunal. The Act also bans rental bidding wars, where landlords and agents encourage prospective tenants to offer more than the asking rent to secure a property. It makes it illegal to discriminate against tenants who have children or who receive benefits. It gives tenants more rights to request pets in rental properties, and it applies the Decent Homes standard, which currently only exists for social housing, to the private rental sector, meaning properties will need to meet minimum standards for insulation, repair, and modern facilities. For tenants, especially those who've experienced the insecurity and fear of Section 21, this Act sounds like a massive win, and in many ways it is. These protections are long overdue. But there's another side to this story that's going to create serious consequences in the short term. 66% of landlords say they believe it will be harder to regain possession of their properties without Section 21. And even though 71% say they've never actually used a Section 21 eviction, many view it as a vital safety net. It's the nuclear option that makes them feel secure about renting out their property in the first place. Take that away, and a lot of landlords are re-evaluating whether they want to be landlords at all. The reports coming in from property professionals and online forums are concerning. Hundreds, possibly thousands of landlords are issuing final Section 21 notices right now, before Christmas, to get their properties back before the Act comes into force. These landlords aren't planning to find new tenants. They're planning to sell. They're exiting the market entirely. For the tenants receiving those notices, this is devastating. You're being forced out of your home through no fault of your own, right before Christmas, at a time when rental properties are scarce and competition is fierce. Many will struggle to find anywhere suitable. Some will end up in temporary accommodation. Others will be forced to move in with family or leave the area entirely. And when those properties are sold, they're not staying in the rental market. They're becoming owner-occupied homes, which shrinks the pool of available rental properties even further. This brings us to a bigger problem that's been building for years. 30% of landlords have already quit the market entirely. 50% of landlords surveyed by HMRC say they're considering leaving. The private rental sector hasn't grown since 2016. It's actually shrunk back to the size it was nearly a decade ago. And now we're adding a major legislative change that, while beneficial for tenant rights, is going to accelerate this exodus in the short term. Why are landlords leaving? The Renters' Rights Act is one pressure, but it's far from the only one. There's ongoing debate about energy performance certificate requirements, with proposals that all rental properties must reach EPC Level C by 2028. Bringing older properties up to that standard is expensive, sometimes prohibitively so, and many landlords are deciding it's not worth the investment. Landlords who are staying in the game are facing enormous costs for building safety remediation following the Grenfell disaster, dealing with damp and mould issues, and upgrading existing housing stock to meet new regulations. Over £50 billion is expected to be invested in existing social and rental housing stock over the next 5 years, which represents 43% of social housing turnover. That's money going into maintaining and upgrading what already exists, rather than building new homes. And in April of this year, Awab's law was implemented for social housing, requiring landlords to repair dangerous hazards like damp and mould within specific timeframes. It's expected to extend to private rentals as part of the Decent Home Standard under the new Act, which means more costs, more compliance requirements, and more risk for landlords. The result of all these pressures is a prediction that many experts are making with increasing confidence. The private rental sector could shrink drastically in 2026. Not slightly, drastically. We're potentially talking about tens of thousands of properties leaving the rental market in a single year. And that creates the perfect storm. Because while supply is contracting, demand isn't going anywhere. The UK population is ageing rapidly. The proportion of people aged 65 and over is expected to increase by 50% by 2039. These older people aren't just staying in their homes, they're often living in larger properties that families desperately need. But there's enormous political and social resistance to any policy that would encourage or force downsizing. The UK needs 300,000 new homes built every year just to keep pace with demand and start making a dent in the existing shortage. We're currently building around 230,000. That's a shortfall of 70,000 homes every single year, and it's been that way for over a decade. Compared to similar European countries, the UK has a backlog of 4.3 million missing homes that were simply never built. 4.3 million. That's not a number you solve quickly. The planning system is a nightmare of delays and rejections. We're seeing the fewest number of planning approvals in over a decade. Developments that should be straightforward get stuck in bureaucratic hell for years. And by the time approval comes through, economic conditions have changed and developers can't make the numbers work anymore. The construction industry is also facing a massive labour shortage. We need at least 225,000 additional workers by 2027 to meet even current demand, let alone the increased building rates we actually need. Brexit reduced the available workforce. An ageing demographic means fewer young people entering trades, and the pay and conditions in construction aren't attractive enough to pull people in from other sectors. So you've got demand that's structurally locked in and growing, and supply that's both insufficient and actively shrinking in the rental market. What happens next is predictable and ugly. rents are going to continue rising, and probably faster than they did this year. Current predictions suggest we could see rent increases of between 5 and 10% in 2026, which is significantly higher than the 2.4 to 5.5% we've seen this year. That's on top of the 36% increase since 2020. For a tenant paying the UK average of £1,354 a month, a 10% increase means finding another £135 a month, or over £1,600 a year. Where's that money supposed to come from? Homelessness is already up 8% this year, and that was before the mass Section 21 evictions that are likely coming before Christmas and before the full impact of the Renters' Rights Act plays out. London boroughs are reporting a £330 million overspend on homelessness services. They're legally required to provide temporary accommodation to qualifying households, but the costs are spiralling out of control. The gap between what councils spend on temporary accommodation and what they receive back from government housing benefit subsidies hit £140 million in 2024 to 25, up 45% from the year before. If these trends continue, more boroughs are going to need emergency financial support from central government. Some may even issue Section 114 notices, which are essentially declarations of bankruptcy. Councils going bankrupt because they can't afford to house homeless residents is a shocking indictment of how broken the system has become. The social housing sector can't absorb the overflow either. They're already overwhelmed with over 1 million households on waiting lists, and they're building fewer new homes than they were 20 years ago. Temporary accommodation is stretched to breaking point. Private landlords are leaving. Social housing can't expand fast enough, and people still need somewhere to live. The only way this ends is with more people falling through the cracks into genuine housing insecurity. But here's something interesting, and it's a small ray of hope in an otherwise pretty bleak picture. Liverpool has been trying something different, and it's actually working. Instead of creating an adversarial relationship with landlords, Liverpool City Council is actively supporting them. They offer grants of up to £10,000 to landlords who will renovate properties that aren't currently suitable for letting and then lease them to the council as social housing for a guaranteed 5-year period. 10 grand can cover a new kitchen, a bathroom, carpets, and decent decorating. It brings an empty or substandard property back into productive use. The landlord gets a guaranteed income stream with no voids and no problem tenants because the council manages everything. The council gets social housing without the upfront cost of buying land and building from scratch. And families get taken out of expensive temporary accommodation and placed in stable, decent homes. This model works because it recognises that landlords aren't the enemy. Most landlords are ordinary people with 1 or 2 properties trying to make a reasonable return on their investment. They're not mega corporations or slum landlords, though those exist and absolutely should be dealt with harshly. But penalising all landlords with regulation after regulation, cost after cost, and making it harder and riskier to rent property doesn't solve anything. It just drives more of them out of the market. Liverpool's approach says, let's work together. Let's make it attractive for you to provide housing, and let's ensure that housing meets proper standards. It's a collaboration rather than a confrontation. The problem is, almost no other local authority in the country is following Liverpool's lead. Most councils are broke and can't afford to set up grant schemes. Central government hasn't created a national framework to encourage this kind of cooperation. And so, we're stuck in a system where landlords feel attacked and unsupported, tenants feel exploited and insecure, and councils are caught in the middle with no money and mounting responsibilities. So where does this leave us? We're heading into 2026 with a rental market that's being fundamentally reshaped. Supply has increased from record lows, but it's still nowhere near enough, and it's concentrated in the wrong places. The Renters' Rights Act is going to give tenants crucial protections that they absolutely need, But in the short term, it's likely to push more landlords out of the market before new landlords feel confident enough to enter under the new rules. Rents are going to keep rising because demand continues to outstrip supply, and landlords who stay in the market will need to cover increased costs and risks. Affordability is going to get worse before it gets better. More people are going to find themselves unable to save for a deposit while renting, unable to rent because they can't afford it, and unable to access social housing because the waiting lists are too long. Homelessness is going to increase. Councils are going to face even more financial pressure. And all of this is happening while we're still not building anywhere close to the number of homes we actually need. This isn't just a housing issue, it's an economic issue. When people spend nearly half their income on rent, they can't spend money on anything else. Businesses suffer. The economy stagnates. It's a social issue. Housing insecurity affects children's education, people's mental and physical health, and overall life outcomes. It's an intergenerational issue. Young people can't afford to move out, start families, or build independent lives. Middle-aged people, who should be in their peak earning years, are still renting with no prospect of ever owning. And older people are sitting in homes that are too large for their needs because there's nowhere suitable and affordable to downsize to. The solutions exist, but they require political will and long-term thinking that goes beyond one election cycle. We need massive planning reform to make it easier and faster to build homes where people actually want to live. We need investment in training the construction workers who will build those homes. We need a proper industrial strategy for housing that treats it as critical national infrastructure rather than something the market will magically sort out. We need to recognise that the private rental sector is a crucial part of the housing ecosystem and find ways to encourage responsible landlords while cracking down hard on rogues. We need councils to have the funding and powers to build social housing at scale again. And we need to accept that this is going to cost money up front, but the cost of not doing it is far higher in the long run. For tenants watching this, the advice right now is to build and maintain a good relationship with your landlord if you have one who's reasonable. Pay rent on time if you possibly can. Report maintenance issues clearly and in writing. Be a good tenant, because landlords who are on the fence about staying in the market are more likely to keep properties with reliable tenants who don't cause problems. Understand your rights under the new Act, especially around challenging unfair rent increases and knowing the proper grounds for eviction. And start thinking about your options now rather than waiting for a crisis. If your landlord hints they might sell, don't bury your head in the sand. Start looking at what else is available and what you can afford. For landlords, the message is equally important. Get educated about the Renters' Rights Act now. Don't wait until it comes into force and you're scrambling to understand what you're allowed to do. Make sure your properties meet the standards that are coming, particularly around the Decent Homes Standard. Budget for compliance costs rather than being caught off guard. And think seriously about whether you're in this for the long term. If you're not, it might be better to exit on your own terms rather than being forced out later. But if you are committed to being a landlord, recognise that the new system is designed to protect tenants from the worst practices that have plagued the sector. Good landlords who treat tenants fairly have nothing to fear from these changes. The rental market isn't improving, it's transforming. And the next 12 months are going to be turbulent. More people are going to struggle. More landlords are going to leave. More pressure is going to fall on councils and the social housing sector. But eventually, if the right policy decisions are made, if enough homes get built, if landlords and tenants can find a way to work within the new framework, we might come out the other side with a rental sector that's more secure, more affordable, and more functional than what we have now. That's a big if though. Make sure you've hit that like button if you found this information valuable. These deep dives into what's really happening in UK property take a lot of research, and your support helps us keep bringing you this level of detailed analysis. And if you're not already subscribed to Property Reporter, do it now. We're tracking every development in the UK housing and property market, breaking down the complex data and giving you the real story behind the headlines. Whether you're a tenant, a landlord, a first-time buyer, or someone just trying to understand what's happening to UK housing, we've got you covered with regular updates and in-depth analysis. The question facing the UK right now isn't whether the rental market will change. That's already happening. The real question is whether anyone will be able to afford what comes next. And that's something we'll all be finding out together over the coming year. Stay informed, stay prepared, and we'll keep bringing you the facts you need to navigate whatever comes next.